Yo, Foul Hooked Whitey is back. Episode 2, Fly Fishing Cuba. So, basically, I left off in episode 1 with just my observation of how hard it is to operate in Cuba. The embargo has just saddled these people with having to problem solve and come up with stuff that you and I would never even think would be an issue of getting your hands on. Auto parts, toilet parts, you name it. It's like everything's a struggle there. So before we left Havana, and this is a past trip, and I'll get into the trip we're going to take in a couple weeks. But on this past trip, after I got my deodorant, I'm like, fuck, I forgot my phone charger. I don't know what I was doing when I was packing, but clearly I wasn't paying attention. Must be that Northern Lights or something. So he's like, okay, I can get you a charger probably. I'm like, fucking probably? Damn, I got to have a charger. My phone's my baby for pics and shit. He's like, okay. So we go to what basically looks like a kiosk. It's one dude behind a glass window, and the fucking square footage on this building might be like, 25 feet. It's tiny, right? And it's hot. And, this dude is probably selling phones, and we went there for a charger. So I'm like, I need one for my iPhone. And while I'm here, give me another one for my iPad, just in case. And, this kid, hands me one, the kind of block type phone charger, right? And I don't know shit about them other than I plug them in. And Humberto says, test it. That's what he says to this kid selling these chargers. So the kid takes it out of the box, rigs it up, and the first two didn't work. They didn't work. That's because it's not an Apple charger. It's a Chinese knockoff charger. And, they didn't work. And I would have walked away from that building. I would have said, okay, I'll take it. Like I'm at fucking Best Buy or something, like a micro Best Buy. No, you're not. Just like trying to find a stick of deodorant. Trying to find a legit charger that works, difficult. Which, to you and me seems fucking weird, because it is. But that's that thing about Cubans having to work harder. So, Cuba right now is in a tough place. And in my lifetime, I've hoped, way before I started flats fishing, I hoped that somehow the United States and Cuba could have, a breakup in hostility. Just a little bit of progress. So that just hasn't happened. And, the Cuban government don't give a fuck. You're probably talking about 5% of the population getting anything and everything they need. So when it comes to their people, fuck them. That's the regime in Cuba. I believe that. I feel that because they don't do anything innovative, and they don't try us. They don't try to extend an olive branch to some of the countries that have a problem with Cuba. So our trip in 2 weeks is going to be Jardins de la Reina, and that's Gardens of the Queen. And this is a liveaboard experience, and I've done that before. So, you fly to here, you get bused to here, you get on a small boat, and then they take you a couple hundred yards out to your liveaboard. And the value in a liveaboard is that you are out in the middle of the shit, and you don't have to make long runs to get to the shit. That's the value in a liveaboard. Plus, my experience in Cuba, I got to admit it, the food isn't that good. Kind of fucking looks good. But the food we've had at some of the hotels and resorts where we also fish out of just are not fucking tasty food. On the liveaboard they are. So it's better service, better food, but it's quite a bit more expensive. And, this trip that I've got, again, Jardins de la Reina, I had a tough time filling that fucker. I've never not filled a Cuba trip to capacity. And, people see me, they see people on social media, holding up a nice tarpon or a bonefish, or, if Christ bless me on that day, maybe a fucking permit. But the biggest problem with Cuba, in my opinion, is when you do the social media post on catching fish, people think that, like, I'm living a fucking dream. And, that's fair because I do get to travel, but I don't think the average fly shop customer knows how it works. When I commit to a trip for my shop, I'm all fucking in. I mean, I'm buying 10 spots. And guess what? If you don't sell all 10 spots, you eat those spots you didn't fill. They don't fucking care. You committed to that, and you got to fill it. And this one, I mean, this is actually, this trip, Jardines de la Reina, I'm going to lose fucking money. I mean, just because I wasn't able to fill it. So when shops do hosted trips internationally, there's definitely a risk to losing money. Because the outfitter, the lodge or camp owners, you didn't fill the trip. You only bring in a 7 and we billed you for 10. Tough titties. We get paid for 10. An Italian company called Avalon is virtually the only outfitter that can sell trips and guide in Cuba. Supposedly Fidel Castro was a very avid diver. And he was savvy enough, even as a commie, to say, hey, we can't fuck with these reefs. We've got to preserve this. We have to maintain this. We can't let locals fish it. And then Avalon comes in and basically convinces the government, hey, we can make you money on these flats. And, the Cuban government is not exactly good at making money. So they jumped on it. And I don't know if this is true, but I heard that the Cuban government gets a 50% take on some of these trips. And what that means is, I had a great tarpon trip in Cuba on a liverboard in April. A great trip. I mean, it was superb, right? Nice fish, liveaboard, beautiful weather. It was fun. My invoice on that trip was like 11 dudes at $9,000 each, plus a few $100 for this and that. So basically, I owed Avalon $100,000 to bring 12 of us there. When I go on these trips, if I fill them, I don't pay. I get to go free. That's the value in being a host. But if you don't sell out the trip, the host takes it in the ass. And I don't like taking it in the ass. It's never happened. It's one of those. So I heard that Avalon has to give the Cuban government half. I mean, fucking half. I mean, that's that communist shakedown I was referencing. So, Cuba's got so many different nuances to it that once you go a few times, you're just going to see some weird shit. I was fishing Cayo Romano, which is a resort type setting, beautiful fucking hotel. I mean, really beautiful. And at the marina one morning, I see this guide who's a good permit guy named Leo. I called him Leo, and he's like, Leo. So he goes by Leo. And I see him give a few dollars to this dude that's kind of standing around at the marina. And the next day I fish with him. I'm like, hey, yo, Leo, what's the deal with that? And he's like, I got to give them 15% of my tips in order to park the boat here that I don't even fucking own. That's that shakedown I'm talking about in Cuba. We were exiting Cuba one time in one of these old school airports. You go through security, and now you got to go to like a custom or an immigration Cuban, right? And he's in this weird little box. And I walk in there. The dude looks at my passport, sends me on into the terminal. I'm done. My client, my friend, comes in next after me. And this Cuban official holds up a handwritten piece of paper with $100 on it. Just fucking, here's Larry getting ready to get out of the country. And this dude's like holding up a piece of paper. Larry's pretty savvy. He's like, I don't owe you $100 to leave the country. And the guy looked at him and said, go ahead and go through. The next guy that came up, another customer of mine, got the same thing from the guy. Dude holds up a $100 piece of white paper. In other words, give me a C note. And, this dude's not a dummy. He's a good dude, right? I mean, I love him. Brian is one of my best customers. He gives him the fucking 100. So, like, right there, a Cuban government official shook down an American for a $100 bill. And let me tell you something, a $100 bill in Cuba is a lot of fucking money. I mean, it's useful here too. So you got to be careful in Cuba, not so much for crime, but the shakedown, right? And right now, economically, Joe Schmo in Cuba, he's fucking hurting. You could get your cell phone ripped off right out of your hands. And, I've never seen anything like that in all my times in both rural and metro parts of Cuba. But it can happen. So this trip that we've got coming up here is Jardines de la Reina, like I said, and it's mostly a bone fishing permit trip. There's tarpon around, there's snook around, and there's probably a lot of barracuda. But from a marketing perspective, it's a bonefish and permit trip. And, the most exciting thing for me on this trip that's coming up, and this is like October 26th to November 2nd, is I get to bring my wife. And my wife has traveled with me a little bit. We've gone to the Bahamas together. We're going to go to Mexico together. But my wife is she's like a conservative, outdoor nature type person. She's quite wonderful. And I know that she's going to soak in this experience on a liveaboard. Because again, you're not around anybody. You got your other anglers, and on this trip, we're actually sharing this yacht, this big, luxurious, non-luxurious yacht, with up to 20 divers. So it's going to be kind of an interesting mix of people, but I'm looking so forward to her getting a chance to see what I've seen. Fucking sea turtles everywhere, sharks everywhere. So as we get ready to embark on this trip to Jardines de la Reina, my wish, my hope, is that my wife Libby has the best trip of anybody. She's really been waiting for this trip. She's quite a bit younger than me, thank God. And, she kind of knows that, getting a chance to go to Cuba is special. That it's unique. It's not Belize, it's not Mexico, it's not the Bahamas. It's in and to itself. For all the heartache and all the struggles, it's still a fascinating country to see, because in Cuba, if it's got 4 fucking wheels, they're driving it. Might be pulled by a donkey, but they're fucking driving it. So here's to our trip, Jardines de la Reina, and again, I hope Libby has the best trip of anybody. So that's all I got. Fly fishing Cuba, episode 2 done. Foul hooked Whitey out. See you next week.